Every day, countless actions unfold almost without thought: brushing teeth, checking a phone, reaching for a midday snack. These behaviors, so effortless and automatic, are orchestrated by intricate networks within the brain. Habits shape our lives, dictating routines and quietly steering decisions, yet their mechanisms remain hidden beneath conscious awareness. At the heart of this process lies the brain's capacity to encode patterns, transforming repeated acts into ingrained pathways that persist long after their origins are forgotten. Understanding how the brain builds and breaks habits is not just a matter of curiosity, but a key to unlocking personal change. Neuroscience has revealed that habits reside in deep structures like the basal ganglia, their formation powered by chemical messengers such as dopamine. This landscape is dynamic. Habits can be created, reshaped, or dismantled. To navigate it, we begin by exploring the brain's architecture, tracing the science behind our most automatic behaviors. Imagine waking up in the morning, shuffling to the kitchen, and reaching for a cup of coffee. You do this almost without thinking, your hands and feet following a familiar choreography while your mind drifts elsewhere. This is habit in action, an automatic sequence shaped by the brain's remarkable architecture. Neuroscience has revealed that much of what we do each day, from tying our shoes to scrolling through our phones, is orchestrated not by conscious decision, but by deeply ingrained patterns in the brain. In fact, research suggests that nearly half, approximately 45% of our daily actions, are steered by habit rather than deliberate choice. Some studies estimate this number is even higher, reaching up to 65% for behaviors triggered automatically by context. But what transforms a conscious decision into a habit? The answer lies deep beneath the brain's surface, in the intricate networks of the basal ganglia and its crucial component, the striatum. The basal ganglia are a cluster of nuclei situated below the neocortex, primarily responsible for motor control, reward, and cognition. Within this cluster, the striatum, comprising the caudate, putamen, and globus pallidus, plays a central role, receiving and processing signals that determine whether an action remains under conscious control or slips into the automatic groove of habit. At the heart of habit formation is a powerful process: repetition, reward, and the strengthening of neural pathways. When a person repeats a behavior in a familiar context, the brain forms connections between cues, actions, and outcomes. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and goal setting, is heavily involved in the early stages. It weighs options, sets intentions, and guides behavior. However, as the action is repeated, say, reaching for a donut with morning coffee, the responsibility gradually shifts. The basal ganglia, particularly the striatum, take over, streamlining the process. This transfer is not just about efficiency, it is the brain's way of conserving mental energy, automating behavior so that conscious effort can be reserved for novel or complex challenges. Dopamine, a neurotransmitter often associated with pleasure and motivation, is a key player in this transition. When a behavior is followed by a rewarding outcome, like the taste of a sweet treat or the satisfaction of a completed task, dopamine is released. This release acts as a teaching signal, reinforcing the association between the cue, the action, and the reward. Over time, as the behavior is repeated and rewarded, dopamine helps cement the neural pathways that make the action automatic. This is why habits, once formed, can feel almost effortless, and why breaking them can be so challenging. Neuroscientists have mapped out the circuits underlying these processes with increasing precision. Signals travel through closed loops connecting the cortex to the striatum and back again. These loops operate in parallel. Some are responsible for goal-directed actions, while others specialize in habits. The dorsomedial striatum, for example, is most active when we make decisions based on expected outcomes, choosing actions that help us achieve specific goals. In contrast, the dorsolateral striatum becomes more prominent as behaviors become habitual, responding to cues in the environment with automatic routines. This division of labor is encapsulated in what researchers call the ascending spiral hypothesis, which describes how dopamine signals move through these circuits, enabling the shift from conscious control to automaticity. As habits form, there is also a shift in the brain's networks. Early on, the associative striatum, linked with learning and flexible thinking, is most active, reflecting the effort and attention required to establish a new behavior. With practice, however, the sensory motor striatum takes over, allowing actions to be performed swiftly and with little conscious oversight. This transition not only frees up cognitive resources, but also makes habits remarkably persistent. The more a behavior is repeated, the stronger the underlying neural connections become, and the less effort is required to perform it. The efficiency granted by habits is one of the brain's greatest adaptations. By automating routine behaviors, The brain alleviates cognitive demand and allows us to focus on more important or unexpected tasks. In daily life, routine sequences of habits provide structure, support goal achievement, and help manage time and stress. For instance, the repetitive act of brushing teeth or the ritual of evening walks can become anchors that organize the day. But this same efficiency comes with a trade-off. Once an action becomes automatic, we are less aware of it, and it becomes harder to change. The neural circuits of the basal ganglia relegate these tasks to autopilot, making habits notoriously difficult to break. This inertia of habit can be observed in subtle ways. Consider the anecdote of a person who, during Passover, automatically reaches for a donut, momentarily forgetting the context that prohibits it. Such moments highlight how environmental cues and familiar settings can trigger habitual responses, often bypassing conscious intentions. In fact, researchers find that nearly half of our actions are performed in the same context and sequence each day, guided more by habit than by active choice. This reliance on habit allows us to navigate complex environments without constant deliberation. But it also explains why change, especially breaking old habits, can feel so challenging. The process of building and breaking habits is deeply embedded in the brain's circuitry. When we attempt to form a new habit, it begins with conscious intention. The prefrontal cortex setting a goal, making a plan, and initiating action. Through repetition, especially when paired with a reward, the relevant neural pathways are strengthened. Dopamine acts as both motivator and reinforcer, encouraging us to repeat behaviors that feel good or help us achieve desired outcomes. Over time, approximately 66 days, according to some studies, a behavior can become automatic, shifting from the domain of conscious decision to the realm of the basal ganglia. Yet, the same circuits that make habits efficient also make them resistant to change. When a habit is deeply ingrained, it can become context-independent, embedded in neural circuitry that operates with little regard for shifting intentions. This explains why willpower alone is often insufficient for breaking a habit. The basal ganglia, through their go and no-go pathways, determine whether an action is initiated or suppressed, and once a pattern is established, it can persist even when it no longer serves a goal. Research also points to the flexibility and limitations of these processes. The brain is constantly balancing between goal-directed and habit-based strategies, switching as needed depending on context, novelty, and reward. This adaptability is essential for learning new skills and responding to changing environments. However, the same mechanisms that support flexibility can lead to inflexible responding when habits take over, as the brain's striatal circuits prioritize automaticity over conscious control. Breaking a habit, then, is not simply a matter of making a different choice. It requires disrupting the established neural loops, changing the cues, altering the context, and replacing the automatic response with a new behavior. Because dopamine circuits are involved in both forming and breaking habits, motivation and reward remain central to the process. The more rewarding and consistent the new behavior, the more likely it is to replace the old pattern. The neuroscience of habit formation reveals a complex, elegant system designed to maximize efficiency while conserving cognitive resources. Through the interplay of the prefrontal cortex, basal ganglia, striatum, and dopamine circuits, repeated actions become automatic, shaping nearly half of what we do each day. This automaticity is both a strength and a challenge, enabling us to function smoothly in a dynamic world, but also making change a formidable endeavor. Understanding these mechanisms is the first step toward harnessing the power of habit, whether to build new routines or break free from old ones, using the brain's own remarkable capacity for learning and adaptation. Imagine standing at the edge of a well-worn path winding through a dense forest. Each day, you follow that same route, your feet moving almost automatically along its familiar twists and turns. Now, picture yourself stepping off the path to forge a new trail. Each step uncertain at first, but with repetition, the undergrowth gives way, and soon your new route feels as natural as the old one. This is how habits are formed and broken in the brain, through the steady creation and reshaping of neural pathways, a process neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's remarkable ability to rewire itself in response to new experiences and repeated actions. Every time you act with intention, choosing the stairs over the elevator, for example, you trigger subtle changes in your brain's architecture. With enough repetition, these changes become more permanent, making the new behavior increasingly automatic. Forming a habit is not about flipping a mental switch. It is the patient work of laying down a new track, one step at a time. At the heart of every habit lies a simple, three-part loop: cue, routine, and reward. Think of this loop as a circuit that activates in response to a trigger: the cue, which prompts a specific action; the routine, and delivers a payoff; the reward. This cycle is stored deep within the brain's basal ganglia, which manages habits so efficiently that they eventually require little conscious thought. Mastering habits depends on understanding and shaping this loop at each stage. Let us start with the first component, the cue. Cues can be almost anything: a certain time of day, a feeling, a sound, or even the presence of another person. Recognizing these triggers is crucial for both building new habits and breaking old ones. If your phone buzzes and you instinctively reach for it, the vibration is your cue. When trying to establish a new habit, linking it to an existing cue like brushing your teeth or leaving your desk at lunchtime helps you remember to act. This technique, often called habit stacking, leverages the brain's tendency to group routines together, making new behaviors easier to adopt. Next is the routine, the action itself. Neuroscientists have found that habits form most reliably when the routine is clear, specific, and, above all, manageable. Instead of resolving to exercise more, setting a realistic goal such as walk for 10 minutes after breakfast greatly increases your chances of success. Starting small is not a sign of weakness, it is a strategy grounded in science. The brain is far more willing to adopt new behaviors when they require little willpower or motivation. Brief, achievable routines are sustainable, and as they become ingrained, you can gradually increase their difficulty. The third part of the loop, the reward, is where chemistry comes into play. When you complete a behavior that feels good or brings a sense of accomplishment, your brain releases dopamine, a neurotransmitter central to the reward system. Dopamine not only brings pleasure, it also motivates you to repeat the behavior. That is why celebrating small successes, like checking off a task or savoring a moment of pride, is so effective in anchoring new habits. The immediacy of the reward matters. The quicker the payoff, the more likely your brain will want to repeat the routine. If you are trying to make morning walks a habit, pairing them with a favorite podcast or a cup of tea at the end can make the new routine genuinely rewarding. Changing a habit, however, is not as simple as stopping an old routine. The brain's architecture favors efficiency. Once a habit is established, it persists even when you want to change. The most effective strategy is to keep the cue and reward the same, but substitute a new routine for the old one. This process, known as habit substitution, gives the brain a familiar structure to work with, making the transition easier. For example, if stress triggers a desire to snack, swapping the routine like taking a short walk instead of reaching for food can gradually weaken the old pathway as a new one is formed. Researchers have found that repetition is essential. The more often a habit loop is completed, cue, routine, reward, the stronger the neural connections become. Over time, the behavior shifts from requiring conscious effort to becoming nearly automatic. This process can take anywhere from 18 to 254 days, depending on the complexity of the habit and the individual, with an average of about 66 days for a new routine to become automatic. The wide range highlights that habit formation is deeply personal. Some changes come quickly, while others require patience and persistence. So, what makes some habits stick while others fade away? Evidence suggests that success is more likely when you set "I will" goals, statements of positive intent rather than vague resolutions. Being specific about what you will do, when, and where increases your chances of following through. In fact, studies show that people are 2 to 3 times more likely to stick with a habit if they make a clear plan for when, where, and how they will act. This approach, sometimes called implementation intentions, acts as a mental contract, reducing the need for willpower by pre-deciding your actions. Support from others also plays a significant role. Social connection is a powerful motivator, and sharing your intentions with friends, family, or a supportive group can help reinforce accountability. Even brief advice from a health professional can nudge someone toward lasting change, especially when the advice is clear and actionable. Of course, setbacks are part of the process. Most people stumble at some point, but research shows that self-compassion and consistency matter more than perfection. Recovering quickly from a missed day and returning to the routine helps keep the new neural pathway alive. Rather than relying solely on willpower, which is limited and easily depleted, designing habits to be enjoyable, easy, and sustainable leads to better results. Choosing activities you genuinely enjoy, setting the bar low enough to ensure consistency, and gradually increasing difficulty as the habit becomes established all support long-term change. The psychology of habit formation also reveals that past behavior strongly predicts future behavior. The more often you act in a certain way, the more likely you are to repeat it. That is why making healthy routines part of your daily life, such as eating well, exercising regularly, or managing stress, can have a cascading effect on well-being. Some habits, known as keystone habits, serve as catalysts for broader positive changes. For example, establishing a regular bedtime can improve sleep, which in turn boosts mood, energy, and resilience in other areas. The science also highlights the value of self-reflection. Taking time to examine your cues, cravings, responses, and rewards can help you better understand your own habit loops. This awareness is the first step in rewiring routines that no longer serve you. By consciously replacing an unwanted response with a more positive one, while keeping the same cue and reward, you engage in the kind of intentional, repeated practice that supports neuroplasticity. It is important to recognize that building or breaking habits is not a one-size-fits-all process. The brain's ability to change lasts a lifetime, and practical habits like maintaining a balanced diet, getting regular sleep, challenging yourself mentally, and staying socially connected all support ongoing cognitive fitness. The journey from conscious effort to automatic routine unfolds through small decisions, daily actions, and the steady reinforcement of neural pathways. In sum, the science of habit formation offers both a roadmap and a toolkit. By understanding the mechanisms of the habit loop and harnessing neuroplasticity, anyone can intentionally build new habits or break old ones. Start small, celebrate progress, seek support, and be kind to yourself along the way. Over time, these strategies transform not only behavior, but also the brain itself, paving the way for lasting change. Ask anyone who has struggled to quit biting their nails, snacking at midnight, or endlessly scrolling through social media, and they will tell you breaking a bad habit is tough. It can feel like wrestling with an invisible force, one that knows your weaknesses, anticipates your moves, and keeps you coming back for more. Science shows there is a reason for this. When a habit becomes deeply ingrained, it is not just a matter of willpower or motivation. It is a matter of rewired brain circuits and emotional triggers working together to keep old patterns alive. At the center of this struggle is the basal ganglia, a cluster of deep brain structures that help us develop automatic behaviors, not just in our actions, but in our thoughts and emotions as well. These circuits are so powerful that when they are damaged, as in certain neurological disorders, people may experience repetitive, compulsive behaviors or thoughts similar to what is seen in obsessive-compulsive disorder or addiction. The neural roots of habit run deep, and emotional circuits are closely linked to the striatum, one of the key components of the basal ganglia. This emotional connection means that breaking a habit is not just about interrupting a routine, it is about rewiring how we feel and react in those habitual moments. One reason bad habits are so persistent is that our brains are biased by past rewards. Every time we perform a behavior that leads to pleasure or relief, whether it is having a cigarette after a stressful day or checking our phones for new messages, dopamine surges in our brains. This does not just make us feel good in the moment, it imprints the memory of that behavior into our neural circuits. Later, when we encounter a similar situation, our brains light up in anticipation, nudging us toward the habit, even if the original reward is no longer present. In fact, dopamine does not just motivate us to repeat behaviors, it tunes our attention, making us hyper-aware of cues linked to past rewards. That is why a former smoker may suddenly crave a cigarette when passing by a familiar street corner, or why recovering addicts often describe intense cravings in response to certain sights, smells, or emotions. Researchers have found that breaking a habit is not as simple as cutting out the reward. Even when the pleasure or payoff is gone, the neural pathways, the well-trodden roads in the brain can remain active. These pathways are primed for action, and the circuits involved in go, starting a behavior, and stop, inhibiting a behavior, both become more sensitive in those with strong habits. The timing of these signals can shift as habits become more entrenched, making it harder to pause or override our automatic responses. This persistence explains why people often relapse, even after long periods of abstinence, and why old habits can resurface during times of stress or distraction. For those caught in a cycle of unhealthy routines, hope comes from understanding the mechanics of change. Scientists have observed that the most effective way to break a bad habit is not to rely solely on willpower, but to replace the unwanted behavior with a new, healthier routine. This principle holds even in cases of addiction. By substituting a damaging behavior with one that delivers a similar sense of satisfaction or relief, individuals can gradually retrain their brains, forging new connections that compete with the old ones. This approach is called habit reversal training, and it involves several practical steps: increasing awareness of when and why the habit occurs, engaging in a competing response, practicing relaxation techniques to manage stress, and reinforcing positive changes. Triggers and cravings present some of the biggest hurdles in this process. Triggers can be emotional, like feeling anxious or lonely; environmental, such as being in a certain place or seeing a particular object; or social, like being around people who share your old habits. These triggers stir up memories of past behaviors and can set off powerful cravings, which are especially common in addiction recovery but apply to habits of all kinds. Cravings are not just fleeting urges, they are the brain's way of signaling that it expects a reward, drawing on those persistent neural circuits. If left unaddressed, triggers and cravings can lead to relapse, undoing weeks or months of progress. To counteract these forces, experts recommend a combination of mindfulness, planning, and support. Being aware of your triggers, whether you notice your heart racing when you walk by a bakery or feel restless when you hear your phone buzz, gives you a crucial window of opportunity. Journaling about when and where cravings strike can reveal patterns you might not notice otherwise. Mindfulness techniques, such as pausing to observe your feelings without judgment, can create space between the trigger and the habitual response, allowing you to choose a different action. Support from friends, family, or recovery groups can provide encouragement and accountability, making it easier to stick with new routines when old temptations arise. Scientists have mapped out the steps for disrupting unwanted habits. The first is to identify the cues, the reminders or situations that set the habit loop in motion. Once you know your triggers, you can work to disrupt the routine itself. This could mean changing your environment, avoiding places or times that prompt the habit, or introducing a small, deliberate pause before you act. The next step is to replace the behavior with something new, ideally a routine that is simple and easy to repeat. The brain prefers actions that do not require much effort, especially when you are tired or stressed, so starting small increases your chances of success. Over time, as the new routine is repeated, it begins to carve its own path in the brain, gradually weakening the grip of the old habit. But there is more to the story than just swapping one behavior for another. Breaking a habit requires cognitive control, the ability to override automatic responses and pursue long-term goals, even when it is difficult. The brain's frontal lobe, working together with the basal ganglia, plays a key role here, helping us weigh the consequences of our actions and resist the pull of immediate gratification. Researchers have found that stimulation of certain brain areas, such as the premotor cortex, can enhance our ability to control habits, making it easier to switch from automatic to goal-directed processing. This is especially important when stress or distraction threatens to tip us back into old routines. Persistence is essential. Because habits leave a lasting mark on the brain, setbacks are common. The neural circuits that support old behaviors do not disappear overnight. They fade slowly and can be reactivated by stress, fatigue, or unexpected triggers. Experts advise focusing on long-term goals, reminding yourself why you want to change, and accepting that progress will come in fits and starts. Simplifying new behaviors, making the healthy choice the easy choice, can help build momentum. Over time, as new routines become automatic, the balance of activity in the brain shifts and the old habit loses its power. It is worth noting that breaking bad habits is not just about stopping a behavior, it is about managing the thoughts and feelings that drive it. The brain relies on automatic routines to conserve energy and reduce mental effort, so any lasting change requires acknowledging and working through those underlying emotions. In some cases, this means addressing stress, boredom, or loneliness directly, rather than masking them with a habitual response. Relaxation training, social connection, and self-reflection can all support this process, helping you build resilience and stay on track. Some scientists describe the habit-breaking process in terms of the 3 R's: reminder, routine, and reward. By understanding and manipulating these elements, you can break the chain of automatic behavior. Recognizing the reminder, what prompts you to act, lets you intervene before the routine begins. Changing the routine, even in small ways, disrupts the old pattern. And finding a new reward, something that satisfies the same need or feeling, helps anchor the new behavior, making it more likely to stick. Finally, it is important to remember that the brain's plasticity, the very quality that allows habits to form so reliably, also makes change possible. Even in the face of addiction, where the brain's reward system has been hijacked by excessive dopamine release, recovery is possible with the right strategies and support. The process may be slow and require repeated effort, but with time, the brain can adapt and new, healthier habits can take root. Breaking a bad habit, then, is not a battle of wills, nor is it a one-time decision. It is a process of understanding your brain, its patterns, its triggers, its cravings, and working patiently to reshape them. By combining scientific insight with practical steps, anyone can train their brain for change, building the foundation for a healthier, more intentional life. Change is rarely a straight line. Anyone who has tried to sustain a new routine, whether it is eating more vegetables, spending less time online, or maintaining sobriety, knows that progress comes with its share of stumbles, plateaus, and unexpected turns. Scientists have learned that building and breaking habits in the brain is an ongoing process, not a single event. In this chapter, we will explore what it truly takes to sustain change over time, why relapse is a normal part of the journey, and how our brains adapt and grow through each challenge. Let us begin with a truth that surprises many people. Even after months or years of effort, old habits can return. This is not a sign of weakness, but rather the result of how neural pathways function. Habitual behaviors are supported by strong stimulus-response links, associations between cues in our environment and the actions that follow. To break a habit for good, it is not enough to simply stop the behavior once or twice. The connections between cue and response must be weakened and ideally replaced by new, competing associations. For example, if stress used to trigger late-night snacking, the goal is to create a new response to that same stress, perhaps calling a friend or taking a walk instead of reaching for food. This process takes time and repetition, but it is essential for long-term maintenance. One of the most effective tools for sustaining change is avoidance, reducing your exposure to the cues that trigger old habits in the first place. But life is not always predictable, and sooner or later, most people encounter reminders of their earlier routines. That is why developing goal-directed inhibition, the ability to pause, reflect, and choose a different action, is so important. With enough practice over time, these new responses can become automatic, competing with and eventually overshadowing the old ones. This shift is not just a matter of willpower, it is a change in the brain itself, as new circuits are strengthened and old ones gradually fade. Still, the path of change is rarely free of setbacks. Relapse, or slipping back into an old habit, is a common and expected part of the process. Scientists have found that the balance between our brain's automatic and goal-directed systems is delicate. When this balance tips, perhaps after a stressful event, a period of fatigue, or a disruption in routine action slips can occur, and old patterns can resurface almost without conscious thought. Triggers for relapse may decrease in frequency as time goes on, but they seldom disappear entirely. That is why preparation is crucial. Recognizing likely triggers, making a plan for how to respond, and practicing alternative responses can all help reduce the risk of relapse. When slips do happen, responding with self-compassion rather than harsh self-criticism makes a significant difference. Evidence shows that people who treat themselves kindly after a setback are more likely to get back on track quickly and less likely to give up altogether. The key is to view relapse not as a failure but as part of the learning process, a signal to reflect, adjust, and continue. In fact, getting back on course promptly is one of the most important factors in sustaining change. Rather than letting a single lapse spiral into a full return to old habits, acknowledging the slip and recommitting to your goals helps reinforce the new neural pathways you have been building. Sustaining change also requires adapting your strategies over time. The brain's plasticity, its ability to reorganize and form new connections, means that with continued practice and reinforcement, even deeply ingrained habits can be reshaped. This adaptation is supported by engaging in activities that promote neuroplasticity, such as mental challenges, physical exercise, and staying socially connected. These behaviors do not just support cognitive fitness, they make the brain more flexible and resilient, better able to support new routines and recover from setbacks. It is important to recognize that the process of habit change is slow and highly individual. The popular notion that it takes 21 days to form a new habit is an oversimplification. Research suggests that the timeline can range from several weeks to several months, depending on the person, the complexity of the behavior, and the consistency of repetition and reinforcement. What matters most is persistence, returning to the new behavior again and again, even when progress feels slow. This steady commitment, especially in the face of discomfort or waning motivation, is what leads to lasting change. Techniques that anchor habits in daily life can make a big difference. Making specific plans for when, where, and how you will act, sometimes called implementation intentions, has been shown to increase the likelihood of sticking with new routines. For example, instead of vaguely intending to exercise more, deciding to walk around the block at 7 o'clock a.m. every weekday puts the behavior on the calendar and in the environment, making it easier to follow through. Adjusting your surroundings to minimize exposure to old cues and maximize reminders for new ones is another effective form of environmental adjustment. Self-reflection is another powerful tool for long-term change. Consciously monitoring your progress, noticing what works and what does not, and making thoughtful adjustments helps maintain momentum and adapt routines as circumstances change. This kind of conscious self-regulation supports the ongoing process of habit change, allowing you to navigate obstacles and capitalize on opportunities for growth. For those dealing with particularly challenging habits, such as substance use or compulsive behaviors, the process of change can be even more demanding. Here, the brain's plasticity is both a challenge and a source of hope. While the neural circuits supporting addiction can be deeply entrenched, evidence-based treatments have been shown to help both the brain and the individual recover. Chronic conditions require ongoing management, and relapse prevention becomes a lifelong project. Resources like the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's National Helpline offer support, referrals, and guidance for those seeking to sustain recovery, serving as reminders that help is available and that change is possible at any stage. Finally, it is worth emphasizing that achieving goals and building habits are not separate processes, but two sides of the same coin. Both rely on similar brain mechanisms, and both can be supported by evidence-based strategies. Setting clear intentions, using tools like self-reflection and implementation intentions, and seeking out support all increase the likelihood of long-term success. The journey of change is marked by adaptation and growth, as each challenge strengthens the brain's resilience and capacity for new behaviors. In the end, sustaining change is less about perfection and more about persistence, adaptation, and self-compassion. The brain's remarkable ability to rewire itself means that, with the right strategies and support, even the most stubborn habits can give way to healthier, more fulfilling routines. By embracing setbacks as opportunities to learn, staying flexible in your approach, and reinforcing new behaviors over time, you can foster not just lasting habit change, but ongoing personal growth. The science of habits is, at its heart, the science of becoming. A process that continues with each choice, each adjustment, and each new day.